Welcome back to the channel. I'm Kevin, and today I'm continuing my honest introduction to miniature painting. This is my series where I record all my early attempts at painting miniatures and let you know what it's actually like to try to get into this hobby. This is going to be a little bit different than my normal content, and there's a lot more rambling than usual. So if that's not what you're into, totally fine. I'll be back next month with a more typical video focused on solo leveling. Let's get started by talking about how this series actually began, and I'll also explain why this mini took me 12 months to paint. So this all started last summer when I decided I wanted to get into mini painting, and I saw a lot of videos from experts on what I wish I'd known when I started, but no one was actually exploring the hobby from the perspective of a total noob. So I decided I would. The first installment of the series talked about all the supplies I got, and it saw me paint my first ever mini from WizKids. The reception on that first video was tremendous, and there were so many helpful comments that I wasn't actually able to respond to everything. I'm not going to talk about it at length, but as I go through today's video, I will call out a couple of things that people recommended. Also, before I get into it, I think you know the drill. Whether it's your first time here or you're returning to the channel, I really do hope you'll like and subscribe. I do adjust what kind of content I make depending on what people like to see, so if you want to see this series continue, then please let me know. Also, if you want to see someone paint minis much better than I do, as well as make some really kick-ass dioramas, I highly recommend Witch Cove Crafts. That channel is actually run by my friend who's been helping me get into this hobby. So I'll put a link to her channel in the description down below, and you should definitely check her out. For my second mini, I decided to make the turtle duck from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I wanted to go for something like this because it's a lot simpler than the mini I tried painting last time. The WizKids mini I painted had metal armor and a sword, so I tried painting non-metallic metal on my first ever mini, which went about as well as you'd expect. People in the comments told me I was crazy for even attempting this, which I knew at the time, but I like to push myself, especially with my hobbies. I'll be the first to admit that I sometimes set unrealistically high expectations for myself, but I don't think that's always a bad thing. Sure, I was a little bit frustrated in the moments, and I do wish my first mini had turned out a little bit better, even if that's not realistic, but it's not something that keeps me up at night, and it's not the reason it took me so long to get back and finish my second one. If anything, I think setting ambitious goals drives me to do more and get better. So to bring this back to the topic at hand, I knew that if I tried another mini that had metal on it, I was going to try non-metallic metal again. It's just who I am. So I decided to fix that. I was going to choose a mini with no metallic parts. Thus, the turtle duck. I think I searched for cute animal or something similar on Thingiverse and scrolled through a few pages of results until I found this model and knew it was the one. Well, I knew it was the one, just not in its current form. I shrunk down the model and ended up removing the person's maker mark from the bottom to make it flat, just so it would print a little bit better. I'm not going to be posting the modified model you're going to be seeing me paint in this video. I am personally not a fan of putting maker's marks on the bottom of prints, and I don't have a problem stripping it off for my personal use, but distributing it would be another matter. If you really want to paint this, then you can download the raw model yourself and spend 5 minutes tweaking it like I did. I printed this and was off to the races. Sort of. My first attempt at sanding this was just using normal sandpaper, not sanding sticks, and I didn't do a great job, which was fine. I wasn't too worried about this because I intended to print and paint a number of different versions of this. When I was working on my first mini, I repeatedly thought to myself that it would be so nice if I could just start over using everything I just learned. But since I only had one of that mini, I just had to repaint over the areas I had just messed up on. My plan was to print and finish a number of these, so I could keep retrying this and leverage what I had just learned in my last attempt. It seemed like a brilliant plan, but did introduce some issues due to the resin printing, which I'll talk about as I go. Now, just to clarify the terminology I'm using, I am going to count all of these different versions as just my second mini. I'm not sure how the community generally feels about this, but I do think it's pretty much the same as what happened to my first mini. I repainted that one several times, but still only counted as a single mini, and I'm pretty much doing the same here. It's just instead of repainting a single one of these prints over and over again, I have a few different ones. It has the added benefit that I can really visualize my progress from version to version, which also makes for a much better video. Anyways, I started by priming this in black. Here's the obligatory footage of me shaking the primer, which seems to make its way into every mini painting video. Then I came back and did a zenithal prime. I'll admit this is a bit of a waste since I'm not really leveraging this and just painting over everything, but I watched a bunch of Squidmar videos and this is the direction I wanted to go. Last time I couldn't remember where to put the highlights since I immediately painted over all the primer, but this time I took pictures so I could come back and use this as a reference in case I forgot. This allowed me to start on version 1. Now before I show you that, I just want to address the paintbrushes, paints, and all the other supplies that I'm using. In my last video, I talked about everything I purchased at my friend's recommendation. There were a number of people in the comments section criticizing what I purchased and recommending cheaper ways to get into the hobby, which I think is great. The entire point of this series is that I'm not an expert, and I'm definitely not in a position to be giving product recommendations. If you think you have a better set of brushes or paints to get someone into this, then go ahead and leave a comment down below, and it might benefit some other beginner that's watching this video. Now with that disclaimer out of the way, onto the actual painting. My first session was about 30 minutes long. This was right after finishing my first mini, so you can still see a lot of those colors on my wet palette. My focus was on getting the base tan color on there, but I didn't do a particularly good job with paint consistency. Then I moved on to applying the green base, which was easier to do over the black than the tan was. Next, I moved on to the darker tan for the shadows, but once again, this paint was too thick. I moved back to the shell and did a darker color for some of the shadows, and that was pretty much it for day 1. The next day I came back and painted for a little bit less than an hour. I went through and tried to highlight the shell using a few different shades. After this dried, I came back to add the details to the wings and sides of the head. Then I painted the highlights on the tan areas. Then I painted the bill orange. I finished the painting by using a smaller brush to add black to the eyes and add some little nostrils to the bill. I sprayed this with some clear matte sealer to finish it off. So that was version 1. I did try doing highlights, but I didn't really blend anything, at least not effectively. This is especially obvious on the neck, where there's a clear dividing line between the light and the dark. I do kinda like what I did for the tail highlights, but everything else isn't great. That being said, I actually had a really good time painting this. It took me about 90 minutes, and I found it much more enjoyable than the WizKids Mini, for 3 reasons. Number 1, this was much simpler. There were fewer details to keep track of, and it's probably more appropriate for a beginner of my skill level. Number 2, the print wasn't actually finished that well. This was one of my earliest resin prints, and I didn't know what I was doing when I was removing the supports. This led to a lot of little nicks, which aren't obvious now that it's painted, but I was very aware of while I was painting this. Knowing this was at least a little dinged up meant it wasn't perfect, no matter what I did with the paint. I think that leads into the third reason this was much more relaxing, which was this was a rough draft, not the final result. I knew I was going to print and paint another one of these, so there was no pressure. I think this is pretty obvious in my last mini painting video. Given I literally captioned it, I regret making this video, but I might have had a better time on my first mini if I hadn't been recording everything and posting it for the world to see. I am glad I'm making this series, because I do think it's different than a lot of the other content I see out there. But recording everything does change the dynamic of getting into a new hobby, and I think that's worth noting. Anyways, I finished this one up, feeling really good. I was pushing my skills, and I was building momentum as I made this part of my daily life. So, yeah, about that momentum. So while that first mini painting video went up in November, I actually finished painting the mini in early September 2024. It's now late August 2025, so yeah, it's been right around 12 months. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One was that I made a Unicorno for Christmas, which used my resin printer and Vallejo paints. I don't count that as mini painting because I'm not highlighting anything or doing any blending. It's just a single color on a single surface. I did enjoy that project and found it valuable in its own way, but it did keep me from getting back into this for at least a while. As an aside, if I could go back in time and recommend my past self try painting things in different order, I would probably go with this. The Unicorno was just a solid color, but it did help teach me brush control and how to better thin my paints. Plus, it was a crash course in sanding resin prints. I think it would have been a great place to start. I kinda touched on this earlier, but the Turtle Duck is definitely more beginner friendly than the WizKids Mini I attempted. Still, I don't think you could have convinced me to do this in a different order, because I got into the hobby specifically to paint tabletop minis, and I don't think anyone could have convinced me to not start there. Still, I recognize this progression probably would have been a little bit better. Anyways, I finished the Unicorno at the end of December and moved on to my next project. If people thought watching me try to paint non-metallic metal on my first mini was overly ambitious, then they should really watch my Final Fantasy staff video.
Okay, so I just assembled this, and I'm about to do the first test with everything wired and assembled. You may see me cry depending on how this goes. Oh, thank God.
I am tremendously proud of that project, and I learned a lot, but I also bit off a lot more than I could chew. That sucked up a lot of time and energy, and I wasn't really in a position to get back into mini painting, at least for a while. I went back to 3D printing daggers, which I enjoy and is comfortable for me, since I've made quite a lot of them at this point. The other piece of this puzzle is my employment status. Over the past year, it's been in a state of flux, which has been really stressful. I'm not the only one going through this in today's economy, and other people definitely have it worse than I do, but it has sucked up a lot of energy and not left me really feeling up to doing new, big, ambitious projects. It's actually made me really grateful I started this channel, because having a posting schedule pushes me to make something every month, even when I don't always feel like it. Now, to be clear, this isn't a cry for help. I'm generally alright, I'm just a little more stressed than usual. Miniature painting is something I would say I'm very passionate about and interested in, but it doesn't come naturally to me. It's something I have to invest energy in. And I think it's worth acknowledging that when you're stressed and have other stuff going on in your life, you can have things that you want to do, but just aren't in the right headspace for. And that's been me for a fair chunk of this last year. I did try to rally and find ways to ease back into this. I didn't feel up for painting a mini, but I did need some cards for my commander decks, like substitute cards for the Kami War, which is a double-face card I run in my Joda Archmage Eternal deck, or Sol Ring proxies, because I already own like 5 and refuse to keep buying them for each new deck I build. I didn't end up sticking with this, but it's something I think I'll go back to after a little more practice. It seemed like a great way to learn and cement new skills. I just don't think I'm quite good enough for it yet. I put a couple of these cards in my deck and was kind of relieved when I didn't draw them, so I took them out the following week. I really liked the direction this was going in, and I think with a few more attempts, I would have been satisfied enough with the art, at least for now, to run these in my deck, but I felt like the lettering really ruined it. When I do eventually go back to this, I think I'll use markers or some other technique for the lettering. Maybe I'll just watch some tutorials and find a better way to tackle it. Either way, the text was my least favorite part, but I really did enjoy it otherwise. In late February, I finally found the time and motivation to do another attempt. This time I just used white primer, since I had trouble painting over the black last time. My painting was kind of chaotic, and I pretty quickly realized I'd forgotten most of what I learned previously, which was really disappointing. I pretty much followed the exact same steps as last time. I was just much sloppier. I wrapped this up after 2 sessions and about 45 minutes total, or about half of what my first version took. When I realized I'd forgotten a lot of the fundamentals, I really should have slowed down, but instead I sped up. Mentally, I said, whatever, I'm just gonna send this. I did really enjoy painting this mini, but in a different way than the previous ones. I didn't feel the same sense of satisfaction I felt on the last one, where I was really pushing my skills and trying to do my best. On this one, it was more a sense of relief, from finally doing something in this hobby after being away from it for a few months. At this point, I have been actively following the miniature painting subreddit and thinking about getting into this multiple times a week, so there was a building sense of guilt and frustration that I wasn't doing more, so I was really relieved to just paint something and be back in it. I'm gonna be honest, the result isn't very good, and I didn't expect it to be. I didn't even manage to get good coverage, since I was basically winging this. Compared to the first one, it just looks pretty sloppy. The next month, in March, I followed this up by making the Amulet of Vigor from Magic the Gathering, which involved like 15 minutes of painting, but was something. Still, I wasn't thrilled with my progress. Regardless, I was happy to be at it again. And although life kind of got in the way, I did get back to this in early July with version 3. I really hyped myself up and was excited to get back into it and really nail this one. Sadly, it didn't even make it to the painting table. I was taking this up to my painting table when my wife startled me, and I jerked in response. It turns out these little turtle ducks can fly, but they can't stick the landing. This was kind of disappointing, but in a way, I was actually relieved. I had used sanding sticks on this one, but I noticed I still had some off-color areas, even after priming it. I came to the conclusion that I needed to use some higher grit sanding sticks to get this really smooth. So in early August, I was queuing up for my 4th attempt, which I felt really good about. I had the motivation, and I also had the time. I sometimes scramble at the end of the month to get my videos posted, but I posted my July video early, so I had time to do this right and also edit the resulting video, which I knew I was going to need because this is going to end up being 2, 3, maybe 4 times longer than the videos I normally post. I printed and sanded this all the way up to my 2000 grit sanding stick, when I think I only went to 400 or 800 grit on my last attempt. I did a black base coat with the white Zenithal Prime, which is exactly what I did for version 1. I went ahead and took pictures I could refer back to, just like I did on my first attempt. With this primed and highlighted with the white, I went back and rewatched a bunch of tutorials that I found really helpful last year. Being able to hold this in my hands really helped me think through exactly how I was going to paint this, and I think gave me a leg up on a lot of my previous attempts. The big thing I did differently on this attempt was go slower. I wasn't obsessed with getting good coverage on my first, second, or even third coat. I think some of these areas took 5 to 6 coats for the tan, which I could probably have done better with, but I decided to go slow and not try to rush anything. Oh, so yes, I do really need a painting grip. I got some comments on the last video, and I want to assure everyone that no, my hands are not shaking because I'm hopped up on caffeine. The real issue is my filming setup. I generally suspend my phone above the table like this, and I have to reach forward in order to be in the shot. That's fine when I'm working on something larger like a dagger, but not so much when I'm trying to paint a mini. Generally, I get a little bit of footage in the awkward position, and I switch to a position that feels more natural, where my hands are much steadier and I have more control. A painting grip would definitely help, and I've already ordered the stuff, so I'll have something in place when I'm painting my third mini, but if I do decide to make this a long-running series, I'm going to need to seriously reevaluate my filming setup. After doing the base tan color, I moved on to the green on the shell. In that session, I had good coverage for the tan and the green, although I did manage to get a bit of green on the head, but it doesn't matter since I'll be covering that up with brown. I decided to stop at this point, even though it had only been about a half hour. I didn't want to push myself too far, especially when I was about to start the wet blending and highlighting. I was getting over a bad cold at the time, which you can still hear a little bit of now, and I didn't want to ruin this because I rushed. The next day, I came back, rewatched a couple of tutorials just to make sure it was all fresh in my head, and then started painting. The base coat was just bone white, and I wanted something with a little more yellow, so I mixed a light tan for the lit areas and a darker shade for the shadows. I tried putting that darker shade on, and immediately realized I had gone too far. I decided to stick with bone white for the lit areas, and use the light yellow I just mixed for the shadowy areas. My first attempt at wet blending didn't go so great, but I kept at it, and it worked pretty well. Once I had those blends in place, I started adding brown to the head and the wings. That's where I called it for the day. Once again, it had only been about a half hour, but I didn't want to press on and make a mistake. I wanted to make sure I was at my absolute best, because I was determined to make this the final version. It was kind of funny, I was doing this while I had Squidmar videos on in the background, and they were doing 24-hour challenges. Before I started painting minis, I was already in awe of their skill, but now that I've actually started, I can't imagine painting for more than 2 hours, much less 24. Those guys and their stamina is just ridiculous. The next day, I started by going back and adding more coats to the brown to get good coverage. I did add a dark brown to the shadows and tried doing a wet blend on the head, but my phone camera didn't focus on any of that, so you'll have to take my word for it. Same thing happened on the shell. I highlighted it based on the pictures I had of the zenithal priming, and tried to blend it nicely with the dark, but the footage is pretty terrible. My phone did manage to focus when I was painting the orange bill, which was one of the last things I did. And we're back to blurriness as I added black to the eyes. This is when I realized I had accidentally touched the tip of the bill with my finger when painting the eyes, and smudged the paint off. That was pretty annoying, and I had to go back and touch it up. Before wrapping this up, I did go back and try doing more highlighting on the shell, which I kind of glazed, but didn't do a very good job. It was all a spur-of-the-moment decision, and I hadn't really thought it through or watched any relevant tutorials, so I think it was kind of a mistake. I decided to call it there, so here's a grand reveal. So, let me tell you my thoughts on the different parts of this. I love the wet blend I did on the front. It's the best I've done so far by a pretty wide margin. Next time, I would use different colors so there's more contrast, because it's really subtle. But compared to version 1, yeah, I'm really happy with this improvement. As for the brown on the back of the head, not my favorite detail. I think it's kinda sloppy, and I could have done better. I'll definitely be more careful next time. The same goes for the wing. I think even with my current skills, I could have done a little bit better here. As for the shell, well, I tried. I don't think it's good, but unlike those brown sections, I don't have the skills and knowledge to immediately know how to do better. That goes in the, I need to learn more about highlighting bucket. I'm quite happy with how this turned out. I enjoyed painting this at pretty much every step. I think it looks decent given my skill level, and it does highlight what I need to work on in order to improve. Really, the only regrets I have to do with how long it took me to do this, but I'm not going to beat myself up over that. I'm just a weekend warrior, and I'm doing what I can with what life throws at me. I think anyone that's a hobbyist can relate to that, especially when trying something new. I'll be back next month with a more regular project, and I'll do at least one more installment in this series, but if you want me to keep going, then please let me know. The response I get from all of you is part of what makes this fun for me. I think that's it for this time, so I'll see you all in the next one.